Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Looking to continue my series of videos for new DMs. I'm going to do some videos for players who are new to the game as well at some point, but right now I kind of want to focus on DMs mostly because that's mainly what I do, so it's what I know more than being a player character, unfortunately, sometimes. In the first video I talked about just some ideas when designing your first adventure, and basically to keep it simple. Now, going into a little bit more detail on certain aspects of creating your first adventure, this video is going to be all about creating encounters. I'm not going to get so much into the numbers of encounters, like how much experience points you should have for the encounters for, easy, medium, or hard. Page 81 of the DMG has an excellent explanation of that, which can be really helpful with the XP budgets that you can use to design encounters out of the monster manual. It's really fantastic, so if you have the DMG, certainly give that a read. What I kind of want to talk about is what kinds of encounters you should be throwing at your parties at certain points of the adventure. Mainly, should there be how many easy encounters, how many hard encounters, and how many standard or challenging encounters. For your first ever encounter that you're going to run, one of the things that I can't stress enough is to keep it simple. So down here we have our adventurers and some goblins. So we've got 4 goblins, one coming in behind the tent, one here, one there, and one there. So that's actually more adventurers than there are goblins in this particular setup. Now, not a lot of groups will have 5 players. A lot would tend to be, 4 or so. But just using this basic setup, it's pretty simple. The point of having the first encounter be kind of a pushover is number one, it gives you an idea of how the combat's going to flow. What kinds of questions people are going to have. If you're using miniatures or not, is not using miniatures going to be difficult for you to keep track of as well as for your players to keep track of? For example, it gives you ability to assess, how well the party's going to work together. There's a lot of good things that can really come from just having a quick, simple first encounter that can set this tone. Another thing is you don't want to make the encounter too difficult to begin with, because if they're new players and you make the encounter too challenging, so let's just say, for example, you've got your goblins there and you decide to throw in, say, I don't know, a troll. That's going to be pretty bad, especially at lower levels. I recommend starting at, first or second level. I don't, think you should get into too high levels when you're first starting off, because the options can get a little complicated. So let's just say you're starting a first level campaign or adventure. Something like this would be a bit overkill. And it'd be even worse if instead of having just a regular troll, you decide to have a troll in armor with a shield and a sword. So those would be things to definitely avoid. The first one should be, pretty simple. As the adventure progresses, of course, the encounters can certainly get more difficult. This is just something that, you want to use to get out of the way, just to get a feel for it. As you go, you may have another encounter similar to this, but you have a more powerful foe involved in it as well. So you got your standard goblins, and maybe you have a goblin on a wolf. Maybe you have a goblin that's a shaman that has a few spells, like maybe a heal spell or an attack spell or something like that. Or maybe even throw in things like a couple of hobgoblins. Alright, you can certainly do quite a few things as it goes, but the first encounter should be a simple one. As you progress through your dungeon or whatever your adventure calls for, it's good to have mostly balanced encounters with the odd one that's a little bit more difficult. So let's just say that for the player character, something like the 4 goblins with a hobgoblin is a balanced encounter. Something that's going to be challenging but not too difficult. Maybe the more difficult one that you could have would have 2 of them. Maybe instead of having just the regular goblins, you've got the 2 hobgoblins and you've got a goblin on a wolf. Alright, not that these are the encounters that you have to use, but just as a general idea, you want there to be mostly, from when you're making up the bulk of your adventure, you want there to be mostly balanced encounters, with a couple ones that may be a little bit tougher. Ultimately, the only really difficult encounter should be the final one that you create for that adventure. So, for example, let's just say you've got your goblins. Just going to throw them on there, no particular order. You've got, a couple of hobgoblins which act as lieutenants or enforcers, and maybe they're being commanded by a hobgoblin sorcerer or shaman or something along those lines. He's a little bit tougher. He's got some heal spells that can keep these guys in the fight. Maybe, have an extra goblin come in, maybe have a goblin shaman as well. But the final encounter should be the most challenging one. Up to that, really kind of make it something that, the party shouldn't really be outnumbered by more than 1 or 2 opponents if those opponents have low hit points. Ideally, you want to have a lot of your smaller, weaker enemies capable of being defeated with a single attack. Doesn't mean they're going to be defeated with a single attack. You can always roll a 1, but the ability should be there to dispatch of the weaker enemies relatively easily so you can focus on the more challenging ones. It's kind of a balancing act, and it's not necessarily going to be easy as you go for your first time. So if you have the DMG, definitely check it out. That page 81 has the beginning of your encounter design. It's really helpful, and keep the XP's values of the creatures in mind when you're going through and doing it. It's okay to have a really difficult encounter, but you don't want to open with it, and you don't want there to be too many of them, because if you're new and your group's new, the players are going to get disheartened, and as a DM you might get frustrated that the players just don't seem to be overly excited with the adventure, and it can be that it's just too difficult for them. I've been guilty of this myself really early on when I was running 2nd edition D&D. Back in 1999, when I first started, I didn't have a clue how to balance encounters, how to make them anything other than either really simple or brutally difficult. And it's something that I think I've gotten better at as I've gone. But in the beginning, it was really bad, and I just, if anything, learned from the mistakes that I made. Try to keep it simple to start, and get a little more complicated as you progress. With the first adventure that you're doing, going back to what I said in the first video, it doesn't have to be anything, earth-shattering or, mind-blowing. It can be a pretty simple and straightforward encounter or adventure that you're setting up. Basically, your first adventure is something that you're going to use to get comfortable with running the game. That's why keeping it simple is basically the best option. That way you can get used to the flow of keeping track of things like initiative in combat. Keeping track of the enemy's hit points. Do you want to keep track of the player's hit points? And again, it comes down to, do you want to use miniatures or some form of representation like graph paper, or just go straight from, the theater of the mind, I guess they call it. I don't really like that term. I think it's a bit too fancy sounding, and some people get a little too defensive over it, but it's something that when you're first starting off, you really want to do a sort of a minimalist approach. Keep it simple enough that it's going to be fun for everybody. Your players are going to want to come back, and you can always design more complicated adventures as you go. So it's just really keeping in line with the whole theme of keeping it simple. I hope this video was somewhat helpful, along with the first one talking about what kinds of ideas for your first adventure. The next video, I'm going to get into NPC designs, both NPCs that are beneficial to the party, like patrons or contacts or allies, as well as villainous NPCs. So that'll be for the next video. I just wanted to do a quick one here, just about trying to design encounters and what to try to avoid, basically. Anyway, I hope this helped. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.